What began as a wall of shields soon became the edge of the blade. Their tactics protected the legions while creating the force needed to crush resistance. The most iconic was a structure known as the testudo, Latin for tortoise. It wasn't a metaphor. Dozens of soldiers moved in unison, shields locked on all sides and above, forming a shell that crept forward like a living fortress. From a distance, it looked mechanical. A smooth surface of overlapping bronze, absorbing arrows, stones, and fire without slowing. Archers rained missiles, but nothing pierced the shell. Inside, the soldiers advanced silently. This formation wasn't built for speed, it was built for survival across open ground, especially during sieges. As the wall approached enemy defenses, defenders panicked. The testudo moved slowly, but with certainty, and when the moment came, it broke apart, releasing trained killers at point-blank range. But the Romans didn't stop at one formation. They developed the triplex aces, a three-layered system of organized assault. In the front, the youngest, the hastati, attacked first. Behind them, the principes, older and more disciplined, waited. And in the final line stood the triarii, veterans who moved only when the situation demanded it. One line fought, another rested, and the third observed. If the front failed, the second stepped in. If both were pushed back, the third stabilized the field. It wasn't just about strength, it was about sequence and pressure. The enemy never fought the same force twice. Then came the wedge, a narrow spearhead of men, sharp and dense, pushed straight into enemy lines. It didn't spread wide, it pierced deep. The front row carried the impact, the rows behind provided unstoppable weight. In key battles, like at Pydna or Watling Street, the wedge didn't hold ground. It shattered formations, straight lines collapsed, soldiers split apart, chaos followed. Each formation carried a message, order, power, and the will to advance without hesitation. They were messages. Rome didn't charge wildly. It approached like a storm, controlled, deliberate, and inevitable. On land, the Romans moved with precision, but at sea, they had to rewrite the rules. In the early years of the First Punic War, Rome faced a problem. Carthage had a powerful navy, and Roman soldiers weren't trained for sea combat, so they built ships and changed how ships were used. The solution was the corvus, a boarding bridge mounted at the front of Roman vessels. It swung down onto enemy decks, a sharp iron spike at its tip, anchoring it into place. The moment the bridge locked in, Roman soldiers rushed across. Naval battles became land battles. The Carthaginians, masters of speed and maneuver, suddenly found themselves trapped. Ships couldn't flee or pivot. Once boarded, they had no advantage. At the Battle of Mylae, the corvus helped the Romans seize dozens of ships. Later, at Ecnomus, the same tactic allowed them to overcome a larger fleet through brutal close combat. But naval innovation wasn't the only shock. Rome also faced war elephants, towering beasts used by Pyrrhus and Hannibal. These animals crushed formations and terrified infantry. Yet Rome adapted. They opened lanes in their ranks, allowing the elephants to pass harmlessly through. Then, from both sides, Roman troops struck with spears and javelins. The elephants panicked, often turning back and trampling their own allies. In some campaigns, Romans went further. They used fire as a weapon of fear. Flaming pigs, covered in pitch and set ablaze, were unleashed toward charging elephants. The squeals and fire sent the beasts into madness, disrupting entire formations before a sword was drawn. Every army had strengths. Rome's was adaptation. When enemies relied on speed, size, or shock, Rome responded with something unexpected. Whether at sea or against beasts on land, the goal was the same. Take away the opponent's advantage and turn it into a weakness. Rome didn't just fight better, it changed the battlefield itself. Not every Roman tactic was built from shields and steel. Some were crafted from silence, deception, and fear. One of the most unsettling tricks in their arsenal was the feigned retreat. To the enemy, it looked like victory. Roman units turning, fleeing the field, leaving chaos behind. But it was a trap. As the enemy gave chase, discipline vanished, lines broke, soldiers scattered. That's when the Romans turned. With perfect timing, the fleeing troops pivoted and struck. What seemed like retreat became a sudden counterattack. Rome wasn't the only army to use this tactic, but it mastered the precision needed to make it work. In Hispania, guerrilla fighters lured Roman forces into deadly traps using false retreats. Rome learned from that and later used the same method to outmaneuver larger armies in unpredictable terrain. But the most shocking tactic wasn't used on enemies, it was used on their own men. Decimation, the execution of 1 in every 10 soldiers in a disgraced unit, was Rome's ultimate punishment for cowardice, desertion, or mutiny. Soldiers didn't die by the hands of their commanders. They were killed by their comrades. 10 men drew lots. The one chosen was beaten to death by the other 9. No appeals, no exceptions. Those who survived received half rations and slept outside the camp walls. Stripped of honor, left as an example. It wasn't done often, but when it was, word spread. The message was clear: fear the enemy, but fear dishonor more. And then there was Alesia, where Caesar showed that psychological pressure could be engineered. He didn't storm the fortress, he surrounded it with 2 rings of walls, one to trap the Gauls inside, one to block reinforcements outside. Trenches, spikes, towers, hidden pits. Day after day, the enemy was reminded they were outmatched. Food ran out, hope vanished. They weren't beaten in battle, they were broken by waiting. The Romans didn't just fight bodies, they fought minds, and when fear became a weapon, it often hit harder than any blade. Victory begins with obedience. The Roman army knew this better than any force in the ancient world. They weren't just feared for how they fought, but for how they followed orders. At the heart of this control was discipline without compromise. Roman commanders did not tolerate hesitation, panic, or disobedience. In battle, every soldier had a place. Every movement was calculated. But what kept them in line wasn't just training, it was consequence. Decimation, as brutal as it was only one part of a deeper system. Punishments varied, from reduced rations to public humiliation, or even execution by comrades. Rewards were clear, so were the costs of failure. This strict order created something rare in the ancient world: predictable chaos. Even in the heat of battle, Roman legions could rotate units mid-fight, pull back under pressure, or reform lines without falling apart. Enemies, used to emotional charges or tribal surges, couldn't understand how Roman lines absorbed pressure without shattering. And when Rome needed complete control, it built it into the battlefield itself. Fortified camps were laid out identically across the empire, down to the placement of tents and latrines. A Roman soldier could wake up in Gaul or Syria and know exactly where to stand, march, and fight. That kind of order breeds power, but perhaps the clearest example of control wasn't a punishment, it was a tactic. At the Battle of Zama, when Hannibal unleashed his elephants, Roman soldiers didn't panic. They opened lanes, they waited, and then they struck from the flanks. It wasn't strength that saved them, it was discipline, movement on command, action without emotion. Other armies inspired fear with fire or noise. Rome inspired fear with silence, with formations that moved as one, shields rising together, swords drawn only when ordered. In that silence was something more dangerous than fury: intent. The Roman army won battles by force, and also it won them by doing what no one else could, controlling thousands of men like a single body.